廖老师好像好，然后我是音乐学院的杨家伟，然后也是这个学期的主要策划人，现在发生。那我们这个系列是希望能够关注的是，研究者本身能够，我们可以鼓励大家就真的是研究自己有兴趣的议题，因为其实很容易我们还是会被有一些非自己领域或者是相关的人期待说，你们应该研究一些可能是关于文化背景或者是有相关的题目。可是我们希望的是，有些人就是觉得想要做自己有兴趣的东西，还有我们也希望能够看到，是特别是在台湾的某些领域，还是很容易，可能会在某些领域会跟世界上有一些脱节，所以我们会希望能够看到跟这个现在的大家能够跟自己有更多的连接。那我们就会介绍一些，比如说比较新进的，特别是在跨领域或者是一些比较新的题目的，希望能够介绍进来。那很高兴呢，这次我们能够邀请到 Asaf Bachrach 和林一彤老师来为我们就带来这场即兴表演跟认知科学方面的讨论。那我们现在就交给老师。
我还是简单帮大家做个开场啊。我是舞蹈学院的代表，我的名字叫陈代月。我是主要邀请Asaf来这个学期，然后在这个博班实验室讲座之前呢，他其实已经进行了在不同的地方有不同的工作坊相信在场的很多的朋友们呢，也都是因为曾经参加过他的活动呢，再次来到这里听他最后一个讲座。那它其实有很多不同的部分，就像刚刚嘉伟说的，其中一个很有趣的就是他是一个认知神经科学家，在这个法国的国家研究中心。但是有另外一个很有趣的角色，他也是一个接触即兴的舞者跟老师，在各地的接触即兴节进行教学。所以呢，我很好奇的是呢，他对于这个身体的经验如何影响他做科学的方法所以这也是今天的主题 Improvising Science 这样的主题的一个很重要的来源。然后呢，稍微的简介一下他之前已经在台湾给过的几个不同的工作坊的方向，其中一个方向是跟身心学 somatic 有关的，它其实是一个很有趣的方法，叫Roughing 或说 Structure Integration 结构整合方法的一个实践者而他在法国呢就有一小群人呢是不同的身心学的领域的实践者呢，他会共同的讨论或者是共同研究身心学的这个很大的也是跨领域的一个领域。然后呢，而在这个周末呢，他也这个分享了关于接触即兴的2天的工作坊，然后呢是关于坠落、关于重力的这个部分。而今天呢，我们就会进到他比较接近、更学术一点的部分，也就是他的一些这个神经科学的发现，但他会跟大家介绍他用这个虚拟实境来做的一些研究，所以是一个很崭新的研究方向。然后今天呢，非常高兴能够邀请到阳明大学心智哲学研究所的助理教授林一彤老师呢来到这里做对谈，因为主要是我在我的研究方向里面呢，当然我对即兴很有感兴趣，另外方向就是我对这个意识哲学这一块很感兴趣，刚好在这个地方我接触到一些很崭新的理论，这也促成了今天这个对谈的发生。所以呢，那时间事不宜迟，我们就把时间交给这个阿桑，so we can start.
Thank you very much, everyone, for coming. Thank you, the university and the School for Art Education and the PhD program for this wonderful opportunity to come to Taiwan and to meet all of you, especially for the amazing hospitality and work and care. I will be speaking in English. It's better than if I speak in Hebrew or French, but I know it's not ideal. So if at any point, first of all, if anything I can say again or say differently, please just ask and I can repeat. If you feel that you need translation of a certain term or phrase, you're probably not alone, so just ask and we'll figure out the translation. Usually it becomes interesting by itself because, as we all know, translation is a difficult issue. So it becomes by itself interesting. So don't hesitate. You're probably not alone. Yeah. So we have quite a lot of time, right? Yeah, that's really nice. I definitely I hope not to be speaking myself for 3 hours, and also we'll spend time doing other things. Kind of globally, always strange to come to a place you don't know and to get kind of this slot, not knowing, I mean, I know what I'm interested in, but I have no clue what you are, so this is kind of always a bit of a struggle. I'll do my best to guess. So there are like 2 parts, in a way, I thought about. First part, will be more some thoughts about research and about art, particularly dance improvisation, which is my practice. And then the second part will be some work. I'll give you tell you a little bit of a project we're doing right now, virtual reality, which is just I like it, so I'll tell you about it. And I think maybe it will be also a way to a little bit share how at least in our group we are kind of thinking about this kind of mixing of science and art. Yeah? And I really hope for a lot of discussion, questions, disagreements, you know. So I have many slides, but I'm also really happy if we stay only on the first 3 and have a rich time together. So maybe as a first, I'll just say that in Hebrew, the name of your school means movement. So yeah, Noah, if you read it like that, Noah. It's movement, so I thought that's a good sign. That's a good start. So and then not an, we will be moving together today. So you will not be sitting all the time. So Donna Haraway, a philosopher that has been influenced recently my thinking a lot. My thinking doesn't sound enough. I like a lot this citation. It matters what matters we use to think other matters with. It matters what stories we tell to tell other stories with. It matters what knots not knots, what thoughts think thoughts, what descriptions describe descriptions, what ties tie ties. It matters what stories make worlds, what worlds make stories. I will be talking about work, as I said, the first part will be a bit more theoretical, conceptual. Second part a bit more about some experiments and things we develop. A lot of people are involved in those projects. On the left are the projects that are part of this kind of labo dance, which is kind of the name we gave to the ongoing research group. It's been going on 7 years now, bringing dance and science and philosophy together. So we will not talk about all these projects. We'll talk about this one. This is a project about ici means here, and it also means has a long name behind, but basically it's about improvisation and interaction. Articulations we'll talk about today a bit more. This is the virtual reality, dancing in virtual reality, improvising in virtual reality project. IKEA, again, a long title behind. This is a project we are running right now in a school in Paris. It's about dancing with the school children and the teachers, and finding out to what extent it impacts joint attention and the quality of the classroom. Dance is a project that is now being evaluated for further funding, which, so we're finishing an article about this. This is dancing with children which have cerebellar disorder anomalies, so problems with movement, motor coordination. Mind togetherness is actually kind of what brought me over the last 3 years to Japan, and kind of brought me this time again to Taiwan, which is a project with around this concept of ma, and this should be a, and togetherness. Gesture of research is a bit the kind of framework that is developed a lot with Romain Biget, philosopher, dancer, and a good friend. and Joe Dummett, who is an anthropologist and many other things from UC Davis. And a lot of this thinking will be, this is more kind of thinking about research and about improvisation, epistemology, so this is a bit what we'll be talking the first part. So Joe I already mentioned, Julien and Lou have been contributed a lot to the part on the virtual reality that we'll be talking later. So highlighted them. But as you see, it's a big project, I'm just one. So this is just explaining the title. It is ambiguous on purpose. You can understand improvising science in two ways. This is a kind of a Chomskyan ambiguity syntax. So improvising science can mean the scientific study of improvisation, but it can also mean a way of doing science or a way of thinking about science, improvising the science. And this is kind of what will be, so we'll start, if we need to simplify, we will start here and then we'll go there, but it's actually back and forth, folded into each other. Please, again, please, I have no clue if you understand anything I'm saying, especially with all the masks, so I really get no way. So if anything needs clarification, language-wise, conceptually, please raise hands. Wait, raise hands or, yeah.
So later we probably have some introduction about this statement.
Yeah, that's coming up, yeah. Epistemic. Can you say it louder? So we can, I think,
next.
Yeah. So, pointing to the hole. Steve Baxton says that Steve Baxton is very important. He'll be mentioned a lot. He's my teacher and the founder of what we call contact improvisation. He's also many other things, like choreographer, dancer, thinker. And he says once that a consciousness you can think of as a Swiss cheese. You know, the cheese that has holes in it in the US. It's called Swiss cheese. And he says most people are interested in the cheese. He was interested in the hole. So I feel like that's the interesting part. So often in the Anglo-Saxon world, people talk about practice as research. And so to start with, what do we mean by epistemology of science? I would rather think of it the other way around. I want to think of research as practice. It's a bit putting upside down the political, economical model of academia, where you have like the artists who are like the ants or the mice we are looking at, or at best, if they get to do a PhD they're like, whoa, you're doing a PhD on your practice, this is so special. And I think we need to turn that around and understand that researchers are practitioners, just like artists, and we need to think of research as a practice, and in that sense, kind of re-evaluate the relationship between, so to speak, research and practice. And I think we need to come out of the kind of capitalist model of the actual capitalist model. So the person who will be very, very important to this talk, which I think was announced already on the program, is Karen Barad. Karen Barad is a philosopher, physicist, theoretical physicist, working in UC Santa Cruz in California. She wrote in 2007 a book, you'll see later the title, that again influenced my thinking a lot and now kind of guides my, a lot of, the work and the writing we're doing right now. And I want to start with this idea of diffraction. So there's text again, I won't read it, but diffraction is a physical phenomenon. You know, when you have a pond and you throw two stones into it, it will make one stone, it will make, you probably have seen it, kind of circles going out, yeah? If you throw two stones at the same time, they will make these circles, but when the circles meet, they have a very interesting phenomenon. They don't really cancel each other, but they go into kind of a diffractive pattern, that's the name. And and actually Donna Haraway, and later she's kind of the, let's say, the new Donna Haraway or something. She takes the same idea, but she puts the physics back into it. This idea that rather talking about reflecting, which is the visual model, the model of representation of a mirror, where, if I see myself in a mirror, I'm reflected. Yeah? This idea that we can think of a diffractive way of approaching a subject matter. If you like the next slide, together with Joe, we kind of rephrase one of her sentences in the book in terms of what we'll be talking about here. We think the nature of scientific practices in terms of our best understanding of improvisational practices, and the nature of improvisation in terms of our best understanding of scientific research practices. So we are not going to talk about making a reflection or a comparison of a body. Yeah. We're not going to say also science is a reflection of art, or art is a reflection of science. We're going to think of them as diffractive. They meet in a way that's important for our way, that where the differences is what matters. So just to give you about myself, I have a few people, okay, we will get to that later or not, but we'll talk a lot of the work, my dance improvisation practices have been very influenced by Steve Paxton, by Lisa Nelson, and a while ago, but still I think very meaningful for me, is the work with Tanaka in Japan as well. And those practices, I think, might come into some of Lisa's work we'll be doing literally together today. So this is Karen's book. So Meeting the Universe Halfway. Highly recommend it. Long text. So I put a lot of text out. It's hard because I find her thinking is already so powerful and so rich. It's very hard to make it short. It's very hard to take, this is what she means. It's always kind of pretty complex. So just to make sure, Agential Realism is just the name of her framework, her theoretical that she developed. Not other things, but the point is not simply to put the observer or knower back in the world, as if the world were a container and we needed merely to acknowledge our situatedness in it, but to understand and take account of the fact that we too are part of the world's differential becoming. This idea will come into more, we will practice that. Maybe before that, I thought in this quote, there was not in that quote, unfortunately, she talks about, in a different quote, she talks about knowing as something that, as a material practice, something that we do. It's an activity in the world. It's not something that, it's not the world there and we know it, but knowing is a way of non-mediated engagement, so not through a mediation of something, non-mediated engagement with the world. So this is an important concept. The book, she starts from Niels Bohr's practical philosophy. So Niels Bohr was a physicist, very important, one of the founders of the Copenhagen School and the kind of creators of quantum physics. He had a really interesting philosophical, epistemological, so kind of theory of or understanding of what the practice of science is and how we practice science. And some of it was explicit, some of it you have to kind of, and she kind of, let's say, gives her version of his thinking, and that's kind of the core of the book. One of the concepts that are very important for physicists, for scientists, is the apparatus. But you'll see very soon that this is actually something we know very well, and no matter what our practice is. Apparatuses are not mere observing instruments, but boundary drawing practices. Specific material, reconfigurings of the world, which come to matter. They are open-ended and dynamic material discursive practices through which specific concepts and things are articulated. Into two, okay? So, take a stick. The person in the dark room with the stick, and you're going to use the stick to discover the room. Really map the room or feel the room, feel the space, understand the space, using the stick. you're creating you're using the stick as a sensory device to feel the room. Continue doing that. Just notice, while noticing the quality of the way your hand holds the stick. Notice the tonus of the muscles, the way the stick is held in your hand, while you're continuing to explore the room. Continuing with eyes closed. Now, we are just changing because now you get interested in the stick itself. So, feeling the stick rather than the room. So, eyes closed, now we are just changing. Now the question is not the room, but the quality of the stick. How it feels, the texture, its shape, temperature, anything else, elasticity. Go back to feeling the room. Niels Bohr, in this thought experiment we just did, literally, notices two things, or says two things. First, he notices the difference in quality of our hand when we are using the stick to look for something. Then often our hand is firm and holds the stick firmly. So this is when we are exploring the environment. But when we are exploring the stick, the hand becomes a bit more loose, more sensorial, yeah? So there's a difference in the quality of the hand. I don't know how everyone felt that, but maybe. So this is what he observes. The theoretical point he makes, the epistemological point he makes, he says, this is a choice we make, as scientists. We can either feel the room or feel the stick. We can't feel both at the same time. This is quantum physics, basically. So it's a complementarity principle. If I want to study the stick, I cannot, the room does not exist anymore. If I want to study the room, the stick does not exist anymore. It does not exist as an object of inquiry. We are making choices. All the time we're making choices. What counts, what matters, and what is excluded from mattering. Putting it differently, the question is, what is the instrument? You could think of it in the terms of the separation between the object of observation and the agency of observation. If you are feeling the room, can you feel the room for us? Now she's feeling the room, the stick is part of the agency of observation. When she moves now, when you start feeling the stick, now you feel the stick. Now the stick is not anymore part of the agency of observation. It's part of the it's the object of observation.
So, but when we are close the eyes,
yes,
it's totally different. Then you open, then you follow the stick. When close,
yes.
I think we found before looking for how follow danger, or how we 所撞在一起。工业公司工业让
So thank you. So I must admit there is a small important detail for one of the next phases. Niels Bohr was all alone in his room with a stick. Now we are many people with sticks. Very important point. We'll come back to it later. Changes a lot, and I totally agree. So let's keep this question for a bit later. We make abstraction here because we don't have to send you each to your own rooms. So is that kind of first step clear? I don't know, but at least it's.
But I was also wondering, does it make the difference of the experience when you practice for quite a long time? So, for example, the blind person who really taking the sticks to investigate in the world, did they have the experience of the stick as well as the world at the same time?
So the claim of so in pure quantum physical terms, no. If you take this as analogy of the experiments that we'll mention we'll mention one of them, then no. The choice is in physics is one or the other. So the classic example from one of the earliest quantum physics experiment is the one of the speed versus momentum versus position of an electron, of a particle. You can develop an apparatus that has a kind of a door, a screen, and you kind of shoot particles onto it. If this screen is fixed, then you know exactly where the particle is in a given moment, because you know it's here now. But you can't say anything about its momentum, nothing. If you make this thing moving, then every particle moves this thing a little bit, and so you can say something about the momentum of the particle. But once you know something about the momentum, you know nothing about its position. The important here, because it's not the heart of today, the important thing to understand Niels Bohr's position is not in the Heisenberg's term of indeterminacy. It's not that both exist and we can only know one of the other. Literally, in his framework, and in Karen Barad, doesn't exist the position, there's no point talking about the momentum of an electron in a particular position. It just does not exist. It's not there. It only comes into existence because the apparatus allows for it to exist. So its knowledge is not just knowledge of something that there isn't any, the epistemology and ontology are highly tied together for this book. But that's not really important maybe for today. Interestingly, but if we talk about, so there are studies with blind people, there are studies with monkeys, that have been trained with sticks, and we do know that they actually extend their body map into the edge of the stick. Yeah. So really, the stick becomes part of the body in a very literal way. So just to know that it requires training and a lot of other conditions about it. But the idea from Bohr is that it's one or the other. It's the world or the stick, like it's the room or the stick you choose. And notice that if I use this support of the floor to feel the stick, the floor does not exist anymore. The floor now is part of the agency of observation for the stick. There is no floor anymore as an object. Okay, let's continue. Yeah, yes, please.
So when you are using this analogy, so let's just keep this analogy. So you're saying that when we are using the stick to explore the floor or the room, and the stick is the equipment that they're using, right?
Yeah.
But when I'm using the room to explore the stick, then the room becomes the
equipment, yeah.
Or the equipment.
Exactly.
And so what has changed? Is it the object of observation, or?
So both, because we have so Niels Bohr talks in terms of a phenomena. Phenomena includes everything, including us. We'll get there. And then when we decide to fix one way or another, to decide I'm looking at the stick or I'm looking at the room, then I'm co-defining at the same time the object and the agency. I'm making what she calls, and we'll get to it, the agential cut. I'm cutting the cake in a particular way. So, but making this cut co-defines at the same time what the object is, and if you want, what the subject is.
Right.
They co-define each other. The cut defines both of them.
So from this analogy, it seems that there is it's kind of symmetric, right? When I'm researching the stick, or when I'm researching the room, it seems like there is a symmetrical relation between this. But if we apply this to study like the real equipment that we're using, for example, like an MRI that we use to study brains, but we don't really say that, we will say that we use MRI to study brains, but we wouldn't say that we're studying MRI machine with brains. Like the other way around, it sounds really clear if we apply this analogy to scientific practice.
I think maybe it's
so maybe I mean to say so when it's pretty nice. So actually we will talk about that from right now for another point related but different. But if you're talking about so in any MRI lab there is something called the phantom brain, which is actually a dummy brain that we put into the machine that has similar properties. Anyway, to a brain, but we're putting it into the machine not to study the phantom brain, we know that. We're using it in order to calibrate and to check that the machine is working well. So in that sense, yes, we actually do the inverse a lot, every day actually. Every day the physicists in MRI in the morning they go in, they put the dummy plate, and they test the machine using the brain. You could have done it with your own brain as well, but using a dummy brain is just, of course, more economical and safer and so forth. So yeah, we actually do a lot the other way around. Just to make sure that the point gets.
So it's all about like subject, object, medium.
Subject, object,
and medium.
Medium. Yes, just that it's not. I'm not sure we have a medium. So it is in the sense that what Karen Barad says, that knowledge is non-mediated. So and it will get to that question exactly. I mean, you're going too fast for me. I like it a lot. I made all these nice slides, so we'll kind of I will put suspension to this point a little bit. So why I wanted to talk about that? Maybe once can you put the slide back? Up, like up or something like that. No, the other direction. Yeah, this is an example from, so about apparatus, just to, this is a story from Barad, recounting a famous story from, I'm sorry I forgot the truth, the name of the experimenter, and it was a very famous experiment that these two scientists did, one older, one younger, and they had a prediction, the full story, I mean, it just doesn't really matter, but they had a prediction about where in certain conditions where the electrons will go, and it was a very important step or important, let's say, conceptual clarification within emerging quantum theory, quantum physics. And they did this experiment, and the story went that they fire electrons on this surface, and they take out the surface, and there's nothing on it. They're like, oh, the experiment failed completely. But then, a few seconds later, all of a sudden the pattern appeared. And the reason it appeared was that the younger scientist, who was very poor, he was smoking very cheap cigars. And cheap cigars had a lot of sulfur in them. And so he at the time, I don't think he smoked in the lab, though it might have been the case, but his breath had a lot of sulfur. And so when he looked at the plate and exhaled on it, the sulfur made appear the electron. They did not know at the time that you needed the sulfur for that to appear. And so the cigar is part of the apparatus right now. Not only the cigar, it's also the fact that this was a poor scientist smoking cigars and so forth. Yeah. So what is part of the apparatus, what is part of what makes an experiment, sometimes is very surprising and we forget a lot of it. Yeah, so this is kind of... Now I want to... I'm sorry. Unless Sean, do you want to go? Sean, do you want to do the slides?
Yeah.
Not the guests. So I want to talk about fMRI because it's a domain I practice, and I just want to tell you, it's just a kind of an anecdote that will take a little bit to tell, but I think it's interesting to understand a little bit again what this question of what comes to matter. So fMRI, which is functional magnetic resonance imaging, you might know, particular kind, bold fMRI, we'll get to that, it's important, is the one almost in the last 30 years, whenever you see like a big discovery about the brain, how the brain works, etc., you see nice photos with colors, all that usually comes from this technology. So it's a technology that has arguably allowed us to learn a lot about the brain and cognition. I'm not defending this, but this is kind of how it is being usually thought. This is how it looks. This is an old version. The person goes in, it's a huge magnet. Okay? But actually the technology is based on MRI technology, not that was already developed in the 50s, and then became applied in the 70s or 80s. Basically, it's a big magnet. I won't go. We won't go into the physics now. Basically, we are creating. Let's go more. Okay. Basically, that technology was based so you can create these kind of images of the brain, like static images, we call structural imaging. Yeah, beautiful image. They look like photos, but they're not photos in the usual way. They're reconstructions based on the different magnetic properties of the different tissues in the brain. So the different components of the brain. So air, liquid, fat, and water all have different magnetic properties. And so when we excite them using this big magnet and so forth, we get, if you can, the next, they behave in different ways with respect to this excitation, and this gives us a contrast. Again, a nice case of differences that make a difference. So we get a contrast, and the contrast allows us to get these beautiful images. But the story is not that simple because there's a problem. This kind of method is really, really sensitive to artifacts. So things that kind of ruin the picture. It's like if you take a photo and the camera moves, or if someone moves through the photo, or if there's light from the wrong direction, those are artifacts for the photo, because what you want is a photo of the person or me it's of the food. You know, if you want to take a nice picture of the food and always something kind of planted there. Those are artifacts. Go to the next. So there are different kinds of artifacts, and there can be air, for example, from the sinuses. We can think of them as inhomogeneities in the magnetic field. And one of the very serious problems is the fact that anything that has iron in it is going to have to create artifacts. So, for example, this is some of the reasons for which they will take out any kind of metal from you before you go into an fMRI machine. The other reason is that it will jump and, that it may have been there, it will kind of be stuck into the magnet, which is also a problem. But it's also create inhomogeneities and create, and the problem is that the blood, our blood, which comes to the brain for most of us, it also has iron. And so we have this problem. I think So you have the, and those are really, really small. You see, these are images of blood vessels going through the brain. So those are tiny vessels, microscopic, that are bringing blood all the way to the neurons. So we have a problem because we want to take nice images, but this iron in the blood makes the images fuzzy. And so there's a lot of the work in MRI is and was, how do we clean the image? How do we get rid of this noise? The noise being the blood. But then, in the early 90s, 93 or something, 91, 93, in MGH in Boston, they all of a sudden had this realization, more or less all of a sudden. Wait, if this iron in the blood, and it's important to say, this iron, the quantity of iron changes with the amount of oxygen in the blood. The more oxygen you have, the less iron you have. Yeah? Or less this, forget it now. The less iron, and so someone said, oh wait, there is this relationship between oxygen and iron. And if there is a relationship between the amount of iron and the noise in my nice MRI image, we can use that noise to actually measure quantity of oxygen in the brain. And so they created fMRI, which is give you this kind of image. So what these images actually tell you, if you are from the MRI perspective, is how much noise there is, how much interference there is to have a nice image. But you turn the question around, and what was noise before becomes signal. Yeah, so it's the same exact machine, it's the same data, it's the same brain, but before what we thought was noise, garbage, we had to get rid of it, now becomes valuable source of information. It's a question of how we change our perspective. So this is the question of the apparatus again. What is the apparatus? What counts, what matters, and what doesn't matter? Yeah.
How contact with nature, the body, the mind, is that
Contact with nature.
It's not natural level we talk about nature. Anything that we see, I think the body and the natural, not our.
I don't separate really bodies from, nature is not something that is separate from bodies or from, I don't make this separation. We're not going to talk about fMRI more, so I don't think it's necessarily the central question for today. I would say that it's a huge issue, and one of the reasons I stopped doing fMRI is the non-ecological situation, because it's very. We did a study. One of the studies I did that got published of people watching dance in fMRI. So they are lying down and are watching videos of dance. And I had a lot of issue with how that is relevant to actually how people watch dance in the world. So I stopped doing this kind of experiment. So I don't know if that answers your question. So yes, it's a problem.
So can I take what you just said? Can I understand that as you're saying that all this improvisation involves more than changing the apparatus, the equipment itself, the physical object itself, but more about how we use them and the assumptions for how we are going to practice how the physical object, the role that is playing in our scientific practice, instead of merely adding more physical objects or taking something more.
Thank you. Yeah. So you're ruining my talk. I'm trying to make this kind of build up into this huge thing, and you're just telling me. No. No, excellent. So yeah. So what we will be basically talking is, as we said before, diffractively, what improvisation practices can teach us. And actually, the paper we are writing now is addressing how to teach science to scientists through improvisation. It's kind of what we're doing now. Even though I saw today that the scientist corner was empty, so I know we're not addressing scientists here, but just to know that we think of it definitely. So it's improvisation. Is a way of re-evaluating or noticing. If I use the word from Joe, it's like noticing the apparatus. But we'll make that more precise. So actually, talking about wandering, so this is what we did before. Wand is in English is stick, and erring is to kind of get lost. So we kind of created this word wandering, which is like getting lost with a stick. So you did the first version today. You got stuck with other people, but that was it. We already did it. So we can continue. Sean, can you pass to the next one? Okay, so this is embodiment. Embodiment is a word that's used a lot, way too much. A person I appreciate a lot and learned a lot from, Maxine Sheets Johnstone, a phenomenologist, in her book The Primacy of Movement, has a very strong criticism of this word. I think Karen Barad does a good job in rethinking this term in a way that becomes to be meaningful. We might mistakenly think that there's something to do about body and embodiment, but bodies don't exist, so it's not about that. And embodiment is a matter not of being specifically situated in the world, but rather of being of the world in its dynamic specificity. It's a bit dense, a little bit poetic, but for me, very powerful. A lot of work in cognitive science and people using the word embodiment is like, oh, we are bodies, we are in. He's like, no, in the world. And she's like, no, we are of the world. And it's not about us being, like we read before, in a world that is predefined and we go into it. We are part of the making of the world, and it's a dynamic, what she calls later, elsewhere, mattering. People have heard this when some of the other contexts I was talking about Harry Manning's bodying and worlding. So this is some kind of similar to Aaron's idea, and for Karen Barad is mattering, which is really nice in English, but so let's go to the next. So this is an important point. Entangled experimenters. So entangled is a notion that is very important for Karen Barad. Is the thing that it's like being like that. Yeah. We're entangled. Yeah. And the experimenter is entangled within the experiment. Objectivity for Bohr is not a matter of being at a remove from what is one studying, a condition predicated on classical physics, metaphysical belief in individualism. A lot in there, again. Yeah.
When you talk about the quantum entanglement,
About?
after you speak, talk about quantum entanglement.
Quantum entanglement, yes, I mean, so she makes, exactly, so quantum entanglement is basically a general way of understanding everything is entangled.
So, I'm talking about, is this specific to the quantum entanglement, or this is in general?
This is, I mean, quantum entanglement is the place where this has been discovered and experimented on.
Yeah.
The point she makes that there is no separation between quantum world and the rest of the world. We are all entangled, and experimenters are entangled. We'll make it very specific. She makes it very specific. Thank you. So the next one. So I want to make a short pause or a short detour by Wilhelm Flusser's writing about science. So Wilhelm Flusser was a really interesting figure, mid 20th century, kind of a scientist, writer, philosopher, many things. And he wrote this beautiful book, Gestures, and the last one is called the gesture of last chapter is called the gesture of searching. Yeah, it's a lot of text. I just put it in, and I'm trying to be basically what Flusser says. He says there is this idea of science that was created by bourgeois, the bourgeois class in the 18th, 19th century, that is now very dominant, in which we want to have this kind of very objective science. We are studying things, we are disinterested from them. His example is like, the best example are studying really fast stars. Stars that we cannot reach, they don't affect us, they don't affect, nothing about them, they're totally uninteresting in some way. This is the best object, this is like what was become the gold standard object of science are the stars, because those are the things we care the less about, and they're the most far from us possible. And he said the problem is that this idea is in a way kind of misguided for many reasons. I don't want to actually read it. And what he said is that basically the idea was the same way we study stars, we can study ourselves, we can study humans, society, all things, like psychology, sociology, economics. It's like the stars. They are removed from us, they are distant, we are disinterested, and so forth. And he says that's totally wrong, deeply, ethically, and literally wrong and ethically wrong. We are very interested, and we are part of the world we are studying. We are very interested in this world, and we cannot separate ourselves from it. And the error of the thinking that we can separate it dooms this kind of science. And he says things that are very similar to what Karen says. This is not a perception of the subject encountering an object. It is an actual relationship from which subjective and objective poles can be abstracted. Subject and object are abstract extrapolations of a concrete relation. Yeah? So this is what we've started to explore now with the stick. We'll continue very quickly with that. Okay, that's too much. This is a classic example of entanglement from physics. Then I'll give you an example from medicine. So this is an experiment where the famous double slit experiment. So basically, I think it's interesting, I'll tell you, I'm not a physicist, I know very little about physics, but I found that kind of interesting, so I'll share. So basically, there is a difference in classical physics, there's a difference between waves and particles. Particularly, particles are things that are units, individuals in the world. Waves are energy kind of vibrating through space. And one way of showing the difference is if you don't know, if you have something, you don't know if it's a wave or a particle, you send it through two slits like that, two small openings. If on the other side it comes in two patches, that means those are particles, because the particles either go through here or go through there. Imagining that we had like balls here, and I would throw balls on this wall, and there will be a small opening. All the balls that go through will hit one point on the other wall. So it will be like a... If it's a wave, though, it will create this diffractive pattern of lines. So this, if you do that with light, compares to something that you know that is and then there is this weird thing because some matter seem to behave in both. Seems to behave both as meaning. That's interesting. So they did it with electrons, and they found out that when they had the two slits, electrons that we thought of them as being matter behave like light, behave like wave. And they were like, that's really confusing. We thought electrons were particles. All of a sudden they behave like light. So okay. But then they said, okay, let's add a thing to this experiment, a detector that then the experimenter can tell if the electron passed here or here. They go like, we'll catch them. We'll know where the electron. The moment they added this small sensor there, then electrons all of a sudden behaved like particles. So nothing else changed. Nothing. He took the same experiment, only just a small sensor here that tells you if it's an electron, if it passed here or here. And all of a sudden the electrons changed their behavior. People were shocked. They were like, what's going on? We have only thing, and then what we noticed, the only thing that changed was that the experimenter now knew where the electron went through. So when the experiment did not, the person did not know if it passed here or there, it behaved like wave. The moment they knew, it behaved like a particle. And so this is like the complementarity. It's the same thing from before. It's the same thing with the stick. You have to make a choice. You either know where it goes through, and then it's a particle, or you don't know where it goes through, and then it's a wave. Very strange. Then they went even further and created this weird experiment where some of the time, after the sensor already detected where the electron went through, the information got lost. 50% of the time. And 50% of the time you knew. Guess what happened? What was the result? In the 50% of the time that the information was lost, later, the resulting behavior of the electron was a wave, and when it was not lost, of a particle. And that's the whole, every time you talk about science fiction, quantum physics tells you about going changing the past, this is the experiment I'm talking about. That's the past. So by losing the information in the present, we are changing the past. That's it. That's the way usually people thought about it. But what Karen Barad says, first of all, this is a really wrong notion of past and present, but also it misses the point that what really counts is, the fact is that the experimenters are part of the experiment. So the human that knows or doesn't know is not independent, not outside the experiment, it's in the experiment. It's entangled. The experimenter is entangled with their own experiment. So any notion, even in the most science of sciences, quantum physics, the experimenter is not outside their own experiment. So just an example, this is a really interesting study that was done with placebo effect. Do you know the placebo effect? The placebo effect is the fact that often if you give someone a fake medicine, they will still get better. Unfortunately, talking about fMRI and all that, unfortunately, okay, this is, now people are studying it a lot now. Why are they studying it a lot? Because the placebo effect costs a lot to the medical industry. What do I mean? They develop they spend a lot of money, they develop a new drug. They want to test it. They do a placebo experiment. Half the people get the drug, half the people get placebo. What do they hope? That the people who that get the drug get better, and the people who get the placebo don't get better, so they can sell the drug, right? Placebo effect, everyone gets better. It is more people who shouldn't get better are getting better. And so in the medical industry, so you know, if we were in an intelligent world, we'll go like, oh, let's study placebo so we can make people better without medicine. No, that's not what they're doing. They're studying placebo so they can take away the placebo effect. Yeah, this is noise for them, unfortunately. So they did a study. What did they do? They said, okay, the medical industry said, let's be very smart. We first do a study. We take 100 people. We do give placebo to all of them. Then, because we also know that placebo is not by chance. Some people are placebo, there's probably genetics. Some people are sensitive to placebo, some people are not. We take 100 people, we give all of them placebo. 30 of them will get an effect, we throw them out, then we take the 70, and on them we do the experiment with the real medical. We You save a lot of money. Yeah? So they were very happy. So they did that. They take 100 people, they give all of them placebo, telling them again that it's a medication. They get the result. What was the result? Nobody showed placebo effect. Nobody, zero. And they're like, what's going on? We know that there should always be like 30% placebo effect. And we have no one, everyone is behaving as if it was not a real medicine. So they looked at their protocol and they realized there was one important fact. The doctor that was giving the placebo effect, that was telling them, knew that it was a 100% placebo effect. So the doctor who was lying to the patients, they knew that this was a placebo experiment. So they redid the experiment. They didn't say anything to the doctors. The doctor thought that was like a normal experiment with placebo, non-placebo. They gave 100 people placebo, 30% show placebo effect. The point is again the same. The point is we cannot separate, because the doctor is not outside the therapeutic relationship. The relationship of healing is not between the medication and the patient, or inside the patient. Healing relationship involves the healer as much as the patient and as the medication. Eduardo Kohn, which I like a lot, an anthropologist, talks about the fact that in Amazonia, he's studying cultures in Amazonia, when the healer ingests, I think they use ayahuasca and other things like that, it's a way of thinking of medicine, but the medicine that the doctor is taking. It would be really funny if you go to the doctor office, at least in the West, the doctor goes, you have this medication, you have this problem, let me take something. So you'll get better. But that's actually exactly what's the case. That's actually how it works. So let's continue. Yeah, so this is again objectivity. So we have I think recently I heard I was told about improviser, I think music improviser was talking to other improvisers, telling them about the difference between science and art in the improvisation context. He said, oh, science is about objectivity, we are not about objectivity. Science and objectivity often, for many people, including scientists, I don't know what you think of being objective, often is exactly about this, oh, it's outside, it's like something, stepping outside, there's some truth that is up, that is independent of the observer and so on. And Karen Barad says, no way. Objectivity cannot be about producing undistorted representation from afar. Rather, objectivity is about being accountable to the specific materialization of which we are part. Other nice citations. Last one. To know is to become entangled. Objectivity requires that one take responsibility for one's entanglement. So two things I want to come out of that, which are important. One is the fact that, again, we are part of the world, so we can't know of it as it being external. We are part of the knowing that is happening. And that we need to be responsible for that, accountable. We'll come back to that later, this notion of so I'm finding it interesting because not only it kind of questions that objectivity exists, that objectivity as this kind of Einstein idea of objectivity exists, being separated from what you study, but also that it suggests that the important responsibility, ethical position that we have to have as researchers with respect to what we think is real, and how we come to know it. We'll talk about that. Yeah, so you have your sticks still? So now we'll just add another layer for our stick experiment to the wandering. And this comes from a kind of variation that is kind of inspired by Lisa Nelson. So you can go back to feeling the stick, feeling the floor, play with that, what we've just been doing. Just go back to this feeling. And I'll just then give you a new proposal to add to that. So again, feel the stick. Use the stick to feel the floor, or the objects, the room. Use the floor to feel the stick. And now I invite you to use the stick floor to feel yourself. Yeah, so we are shifting again. now you're using the stick, or the stick floor, or the stick room to feel yourself. So now the question of the agential cut becomes a bit more tricky. Who is measuring whom? What is the subject and what is the object now? So if you go back and forth between feeling the room, feeling the stick, feeling yourself, the philosophical question might be hard, but the feeling might be very clear. The quality of moving, of feeling the stick, of holding the stick, of feeling your feet maybe, changes in a way that might be pretty, radical is a strong word, but it is noticeable, between when you feel yourself or when you feel the stick. Even go more radical, go with post-humanist and ask to let the stick feel you. So make the stick now feel you, if that makes sense. Touch you, feel you. So let be felt by the stick. Again, those are choices, material, embodied, postural, tonic choices we make, or consequences are, I don't know, consequence of the choice themselves. Where do I draw the, so to speak, the line? Where do I make the cut? Who is measuring whom? Which stories tell stories? Yes? Yeah, please ask. Please.
Can you say the stick fill the room or the room fill the stick?
Yes.
And then, in that sense, where am I or what's my...
What am I doing? Yeah, so if for Karen Barad, and this is very important because maybe just because the question was asked, I will develop it a little bit. The one place where she disagrees with Niels Bohr, actually it's about objectivity, because for Niels Bohr objectivity was about the possibility to unambiguously report the result of an experiment, so to create an. And so for him, even though he talked about the phenomena and all that and the experimenter being entangled, there was a moment where the human appears again as something outside the experiment itself, which is required to be able to communicate the result of that experiment. And she says, no, there's no place, if we are post-humanists, there's no place for humans in our story about objectivity or about knowledge. And so for her, the universe is constantly, in later work might say, the universe is constantly touching itself, but you can think of constantly of the universe as being, potentially or literally dividing into agency of observation and object of observation. The example that for me, that I made for myself that kind of makes sense is, let's say that we have a wind blowing and there's an opening in the door, like here in the window. So the shape that the air coming in will take is the measurement of the form of the room and of the window, right? So in that sense, the wind is measuring the room, because the wind is being marked by the form of the room. Yeah? And at the same time, you can also think with the other way around. So the way that if the wind, or if it was something strong, so if it wasn't wind, it was water coming in, and they would kind of deform the shape of the room. Then the room is measuring the impact of the water, and that you don't need any humans for that. The universe is constantly measuring itself in many, many ways. So for her, yes, humans are kind of negligible in this theory. Yeah, I think I don't know if So I want to highlight this notion of the agential cut because it goes to the heart of the point you made. Yes, so cut, we all know. Agential comes from the word agent, agency. Yeah? And it's division between agency of observation and object of observation. Apparatuses enact agential cuts that produce determinate boundaries and properties of entities within phenomena. So we've seen that. So it depends on our apparatus, the hand and the stick. We either create boundaries between, for example, me and the stick and the room, or me and the room and the stick. Those are the boundaries he's talking about. And of entities within a phenomenon. So the stick becomes a stick because it's separated from me by this decision we made in the apparatus. Where phenomena are the ontological inseparability of agential interacting components. That is, agential cuts are at once ontic and semantic. Yeah, so it's not that I can know about the stick or not know about the stick. It's the stick exists or not. It's at the same time. In short, the apparatus specifies an agential cut that enacts a resolution within the phenomena of the semantic as well as ontic indeterminacy. So, before the moment where I choose to feel the stick or use the stick, it's indeterminate. Let's say that you can. The moment the choice has been made, the cut has been made, then we are resolving this indeterminacy. So all of a sudden, a stick emerges, I emerge, floor emerges, and so forth. Okay? So those are the agential cuts. Is that clear as that kind of notion? That's it, yeah.
Where the agential cut is made is specified by the apparatus.
Yes.
And who specified what the apparatus, or who defined what is apparatus?
That's the political question.
Does it rely on, like, probably not rely on agents, but does it rely on any observer, mind, self, whatever?
So again, I was not joking when I said it's a political question. It is because literally, the idea that that's the first citation, I think, that we started. I mean, one of the citations I think we mentioned is what is excluded or included in mattering. Yeah, so mattering, in being important, but also mattering is nice in English because it's what matters is what's important. But what matters, if you think of it as a verb, it's also what takes form, what becomes a matter. So matters. And those are very important political, literally political choices that are made about what we study or what we don't study, right? And to think of that as being, it's not just given to us. Choices that are made through the techno-scientific institutions and the economic system and so forth. So the point she makes is clearly also political about that. The question you're asking, the other part of the question you're asking is the harder one to answer simply and kind of to understand her position about what is being, what is an agency, and it's a bit. It'll be hard to go into that here in a satisfying way for me. I don't think I'll be able to fully give her a story because it doesn't involve, properly speaking, predetermined agents. So she has a notion of agency, but it is an emergent property within the system, something like that. So it's hard to say. So, but I'd rather be very practical with your question, and actually we are going to turn to that now, about the agential cut. So we're going to investigate that. So I'm sorry, I can't be better more clear than that. Okay, so we are coming to dance now. Yeah, so I'm sorry for like all the artists and things like that. No, so thank you for people who till now felt that it was totally not relevant. Thank you for your patience. You've stayed in the room. That's nice. Politeness, maybe not patience. Maybe not patience. Yeah, with the mask, it's hard to know. It's good to mask. You go like, what the fuck? I don't know. Like, what is that? Okay. As I said, the attempt here is to provide a diffractive account or diffraction on between science and art, or between improvisation and science, and so it requires kind of delving into both to understand the issue. So this is a text by a colleague, a friend, Suzanne Martin, writing for a PhD, practices research PhD on dancing aging. And I will maybe go. There was a missing slide before, but I didn't know what to write on that slide, the transition slide, so we jumped that. So this is something I call waiting for after I'm waited for, which is from French actually. When practicing solo improvisation, I experience again and again a crisis of disorientation. I struggle to access the compositional knowledge, the improvisational curiosity, the necessary mindfulness that helps to find purpose, focus on orientation in improvised solo dancing. That's the part that comes from. I argue that disorientation is an integral part of improvisation and of a self open to the unknown and to change. It is not something experienced practitioners eventually overcome, but it is one of the shifting constraints as well as potentials improvisation deals with. Smith, for example, calls the state of disorientation the gap. Novak emphasizes how disorientation, especially in context improvisation, surfaces not only spatially but potentially socially and emotionally. So this notion of being open to the unknown and to change as being a fundamental part of the practice of improvisation. Why this is important, so how did we get here from talking about quantum physics? Because we're asking exactly this question. What can improvisation, what does the practice of improvisation can tell us about our way of drawing, or how agential cuts come about, which is kind of a version of your question. And I will argue that we know quite a lot about, we have tools in improvisation or ways of improvisation that address exactly that question. So maybe the next slide, I think it's another. So this comes from an interview I did with Steve last year. While talking, we watched together the 1983 version of Part. Part is a duo that he and Lisa Nelson danced for over 20 years, from the late 70s to 2000 or so. And we are talking with him at that moment about a very early point in the piece. It's online, I think you can find it online. And she dances already for about 10 minutes, it starts in darkness. She's soloing, even though we know solo dancing does not exist. But anyway, she's alone in the space. Light slowly comes up, you see her dancing in the space. This happened, the 1983 version is for St. Mark's Space in New York. And then after a while, Steve enters the stage. Always the same. The entrance is identical for 20 years. He has sunglasses, black sunglasses on. You can see them here. Dressed just like that, just like that. He goes on. She's kind of in the middle of the space, moving, and he starts walking along the edge of the space, really slowly, being blind. And with his hand, he does something very, very hard to see. He does this movement with the hand. And he does that for a long time, and quite a few minutes, where he just walks, seems to be totally not ignoring and not being in connection with this. So we talked with him a lot about this movement, about this, what he was doing, actually. That's what he said. What are the options? I could come on and move differently than I ever moved before, which is a common definition of improvisation. So I could run on, I could do cartwheel on, I could join Lisa's dance right away. I know I'm going to join Lisa's dance. We are going to dance together. But I wanted to slow down all these obvious elements so we don't run on together and start dancing together. No, it is prolonged, it is teased out. Nothing is resolved. I wanted it to be unresolved as long as possible. It is unresolved for the audience and for myself. I know I'm going to dance, so it was interesting for me to start in a very inhibited space. All of this is about inhibition, leading eventually to some kind of contrast. We've just talked about resolution. So we talked about the agential cut, resolving the indeterminacy. Yeah? So when I go and I take the stick, and I decide, now I'm going to touch the floor, I've just resolved the indeterminacy. What Steve says, in understanding this, if we take that, that his practice of improvisation is about prolonging this indeterminacy, not resolving right away. Yes, please.
Comment. So even he tried to contradict our expectation, but after we have seen something, we know it's pattern. Then if he repeatedly some pattern, then you are going to. We are waiting for him to repeat this something, which is title the same thing. So in order to invalidate so if he really wants us to amaze every time we change his structure, right?
So, I admit, okay, I will be.
No, I think this is not a question for me because you cannot answer for Steve.
No, I can say, I would say something because I did do something which is not fair to him or to you, and I cut out the sentence before what he said. So when I asked him about this, so he talked about this pattern, and he said it's totally choreographed. It's kind of I forgot the term used. It's a mandala kind of thing that he does with his finger, repeated the same pattern exactly. It's the same for 20 years. It's exactly the same, and it's a very complicated one. But most people can't even see it because it's really small. And so we asked him why he does it. He says, I do that to avoid improvising. So he uses this term. So I think that's he's answering that. So he's saying like, it's exactly, yes, I could do something else. I could come and do something I've never done before. Amaze you, etc. But he doesn't want that. He actually wants himself and the audience and Lisa to be kept in suspension. We know what's happening now, but we don't know what's going to happen.
I think in this situation, we have different space, public, and Lisa over the actor, the comic. To do something, or not do something. Waiting or no waiting. Everything is in this moment. Something happened. How about this? Improvisation. The time is the people, space, what we waiting for, or how we dancing together with Lisa or nothing.
That's kind of the I've unfortunately not seen this piece live. I've seen a number of versions of it, and I've seen these particular versions for now dozens of times preparing this project. And every time this moment remains mysterious and full of tension. And so I do think that he's doing a good job, for me as a spectator at least. But this is my taste. Some other people could find it really boring and really uninteresting and really just, oh, he's doing this thing again with the hand, I'm just waiting for him to start dancing. It's fair enough.
So
I don't have to say, I'm just saying, this is my experience.
Too much different proposition.
And so I think that's what he's exactly, if I'm understanding you, that's what he's saying. That what is interesting is prolonging, teasing out that time.
Yeah.
Then he'll go into, they go into things, they roll on each other, they run in space, they do a lot of things like. Yes?
I'm also thinking about, have you also tried to interview Lisa?
Yes.
Like, as
Yeah.
a partner,
Yeah.
what she thinks about the improviser and how she thinks about when.
Yeah, so actually the project is exactly that. So actually I interviewed them each individually. Lisa I just interviewed in November. And then I'm hoping next year to interview together with the same video and then to put all three narratives in parallel, not two. Yeah.
What does she
About what?
Or about the not knowing when you will know.
Yeah, it's a good. We talked about it. I'll have to go back to the audio. I did not transcribe it yet, unfortunately. Yeah, but with that, I was curious exactly about the same question. But I can't tell you I think she's pretty much, the way she describes it, that this first 10 minutes, her thing, is her warm-up thing. She's really much in her own thing. She's not really, kind of not concerned by him, but it's not really true either, so there's these layers to So yeah, yeah.
Sorry, one more question regarding this one.
Wait, Paxton, yeah.
Prolonging.
Yeah.
Theoretically, if you would do that, the whole piece, would that be considered prolonging, or because there was no the next move of this one is not prolonging?
So that's really interesting. That relates to our current. This is a side point, but I think I'll take the opportunity. So we are working about this this notion of Japanese, this kind of, we're talking with Japanese dancers, improvisers, about what is their experience. All of them say that ma is about waiting, or about listening, waiting usually, but they're saying it's about a particular waiting to something that will happen. And the best example, you might all know John Cage's famous 4 minutes 33 seconds, I believe, piece. You might not know there were variations to that later, 2, I think. So this is the first of 3 variations on that piece. I think that was early 60s or late 50s, I think, and the next one is from 68, and the third one is from the 80s. The first one, if you don't know, I think was first performed by a pianist. The pianist comes, opens the piano, has a timer. Opens the piano, starts the timer, 4 minutes 33, it finishes, they close the piano, they leave. That's the piece. Everyone who knows the piece and actually gives you all the indices knows nothing is going to happen. For 4 minutes and 33, we're going to wait. So that's this kind of waiting of them. The second piece, and as a, I remember seeing it the first time, like, this is, what is it about? I know that, it's totally kind of uninteresting. Then I got to learn to appreciate it for other things. But then the second piece, the second variation is different, and it's the piece is an instruction. I forget the exact wording, but basically is one action will happen. Go. Something like that. And that's the piece. So, and then in every piece, another action. Sometimes it's a musical action, another action, but there will be one action. We'll get to that, to a version of that later. But, and so that's very different, because and if you just imagine to yourself the difference, how you'd feel as a spectator or as a performer in these 2 variations of John Cage, those are radically different experiences. And so I think he's talking here about the second variation of Cage. Like he actually knows a lot about what's going to happen. And that's how Ma dancers in Japan were describing the experience of Ma. We know it's something going to happen, we don't know exactly when or where or what. And we are prolonging, and that is that moment just before. Can we continue? So, sorry, back to science. So this way, the idea of waiting for something we don't know exactly what we're waiting for is, as I suggest, something we do in improvisation, but it's also something scientists do. And this is from Hans-Jörg Reitberger, which is a historian of science, a scientist himself originally, then became historian of science. The fundamental problem consists in the fact that one does not exactly know what one does not know. We just talked about it, Sean, earlier, over lunch. The problem is that now funding agencies want you to know what you don't know, which is really hard for doing science. The goal is ultimately to acquire new knowledge, and yet by definition, whatever is truly new cannot be anticipated. There are therefore limits to our capacity to bring it about. Whatever is truly new must simply happen. It must take place. In an experiment, a researcher creates an empirical structure or environment that enables him to act in this state of not knowing about the unknown. This is not the usual way of people talking about science, to my experience as a scientist, but I think it's very precise. However, I think we can change it, and seeing what we just saw a little bit with see before, in a performance, a dancer creates so forth, right? And you'll find a very similar attitude. It's not the same, but similar, diffractively similar. So I want to give a concrete example. So what do we mean by improvising? So in a way, what I'm kind of trying to say is that scientists improvise sometimes. And I want to give you one example which I think is beautiful from the history of neuroscience, a very important article, a very important experiment. Personally, this is interesting for me when I did my PhD at MIT in science, cognitive science, neuroscience. Paper as a classical kind of fundamental stepping stone in neuroscience, cognitive neuroscience. I mean, neuroscience at the time, we're talking about in the 50s. Very important people, Ledvin, Matuana, that then became the father of an action with Francisco Varela, and Ledvin, the Nobel Prize winner. And at MIT, we learned about this paper because they discovered the properties of, the very rich properties of different neurons in the visual system, and how different neurons have very different things they care about. So we learned about that, but what we did not at all emphasize, our teachers did not emphasize to us, is how they did this experiment. And so remember, it's fascinating because we are really, the technology was incredibly simple. It was theater. It was shadow theater. We're in the 50s now, no digital screens or anything like that. So they put the frog, unfortunately, with electrodes in its head, in its brain, in the visual pathway, and they put a white screen with light behind, and then they do it shadow theater with objects. They move objects on behind the screen, so the screen has the projection, and then they measure the activity of the neurons. Yeah, so it's theater. It's a kind of a shadow theater for a frog. And they are the performers. They are moving the things. The frog is the spectator, and whenever a neuron is interested, the neuron goes connected to a sound system. So whenever the neuron fires, they hear ta 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 in the lab. Right? So that tells them the neuron cares about it. That's all they did not. That's what they did. They basically improvised with if you want, with the frog, with the neurons. It's up to you. They moved things around, and they waited for the neurons to react, and then they figure out what this neuron cared about. They did not come ahead of time with specific hypotheses or said, let's compare this kind of movement to that kind of movement. They didn't know. They just were open to not knowing, playing with the frog, and found out really interesting patterns, neurons that care about beginnings, neurons that care about ends, neurons that care about sudden movement, but not about when it continues, movement that cares about continuing movement, and so forth. And all those neurons that fire only in one area, neurons that fire everywhere. So there was all this kind of neurons that they described, and all of that thanks to the fact that they came open for the unknown. They did not know ahead of time. If you go to the next slide, it even goes further. They say, we took no records except those needed to illustrate our papers. So very, usually today everything is recorded, and our question was not how great the response was to one or another manipulation, but rather which visual events produced greatest response and which produced least, and what aspect of the image could be varied without changing the response. And I like that a lot. We dealt with our own listening to the patterns of nerve spikes as the measure of extremes, just as one does with an AC bridge. Early in our work, we had found that taking records hinders rather than helps this kind of research by leading to premature standardizing of method. That's a rather radical approach to science today. Today, major science journals ask you to submit the protocol of your experiment, including the specific hypothesis of what you'll get as results, before you even do the experiment, for you to publish later. So the standard protocol today in science, in kind of standard science, is to know ahead of time exactly what you don't know. And they did the exact extreme opposite for that, and it is a fundamental work that is being done. So hopefully more people will do stuff like that. Unfortunately, it's not the way funding goes today. So I want to go, so the suggestion is that improvisation is about suspending the agential cut, not making it right away. We'll practice it in a moment. I will just bring you this last citation, which I find interesting. This is from Brian Massumi, a wonderful philosopher from Montreal. An aesthetic act brings this contrast. So he's coming from Whitehead. So this is like Whitehead notion of contrast. But, let's read. An aesthetic act brings this contrastive intensity out from under the shadow of actions, instrumentality, or functional aims. It brings a contrastive intensity of active potential into the spacious present as such, to stand alone with no other value than itself. The aesthetic act extends the creative tension of contrast that characterizes the emergence of every action. It prolongs the suspension of the cut, the commotion of interference and resonance, gives it durations, so that it passes the threshold of perceptibility and is consciously felt as potential. I realized reading that I needed to tell you what contrast means, otherwise you don't understand anything about that, probably, unless you already know Whitehead. So, Whitehead suggests that every event contains the all possible virtual endings. So for example, I take the stick again. A lot of things can happen now. Maybe this. Maybe this. Maybe this. A lot of things could happen. So when I'm here, all of those are virtual possible ending of the event. None of them has already happened, but they all virtually exist. What Whitehead says, and Brian takes on him as the aesthetic value, is like, if we are able to hold in present time, in this kind of again, we are prolonging, the suspension of which will be the act we are doing, this is the thick presence tension that creates the aesthetic experience. This is the model of, which I find interesting as aesthetics of improvisation, but also aesthetics of science. Is that kind of a little bit clear? It's a very dense text, sorry. Massumi taking Whitehead is not easy stuff to read, but I'm hoping the idea is clear. Yeah? We're back to Paxton from before. Yeah?
What is aesthetic of science?
I don't know, I mean, if I'm saying it like that. No, what I mean is, I think that a scientist, practicing scientist, often would read a paper and say, wow, this is a beautiful paper, or what a beautiful result. Or would actually can comment about their own experience saying, wow, this was a beautiful moment. And so I think there is a place to talk about, aesthetic moments also in science making or in the experience of science, which I don't think have been developed. I don't know if it's been developed enough. But I know from as a practicing scientist that we have aesthetic feelings about experiments, about projects, about articles. We talk with a lot of people, it's a beautiful article. So, and I think they don't use the word beautiful in meaning something else than what we say beautiful elsewhere. I think there's some continuity. But it's something to research, and I'm suggesting that there might be something behind that kind of the prolongation of this openness to unknown that can be felt. Yes, too.
But isn't the idea of sort of you wanting humans to see this beautiful very, 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 very deeply related to science? Since, think of the golden ratio, for instance, P, like all these factors, how buildings or paintings are being perceived as sort of harmonious and therefore beautiful, is very mathematical.
So wow, a lot of unpacking to do. First, we should be careful to separate mathematical from scientific. Those are not the same thing. I'm really talking about scientific science as a practice. We started research as practice, and I'm talking about moments of aesthetic appreciation, which have to do with certain moments or certain aspects of the research itself, of the practice itself, rather than the objects of the research. when it comes to aesthetics, I'm not an aesthetician, but I think I'm less interested. I'm using the word, I reported the word beautiful because it's a good word that hints at something that has to do with an aesthetic experience. I don't talk about beauty as an aesthetic concept, which relates to these issues of the golden triangle and other. I have very little to say about that, very little interest in that actually, personally. And I think that I'm much more interested in these versions of aesthetics, and phenomenological approaches to aesthetics, which have to do about a certain quality of experience rather than qualities of the world. Like, I don't, you might get an aesthetic experience from the golden ratio I might get it from something very different. I'm more interested in the feeling and than what stimulus in the world creates it. But this is kind of a slightly different question than the one here. What we're interested in is particular notion of suspension that involved in our practice as improvisers, and I claim sometimes as our practice as scientists, and I claim that this suspension brings a claim. I'm following Brian Massumi to claim that this suspension creates the aesthetic feeling that Whitehead talked about. I'm sorry, it's a bit dense, maybe. I'm saying, what you're saying now just requires like a whole other talk about what we mean by aesthetic and so forth, and I'm not the right person to do it, but I'm kind of hinting at the fact that we probably talk about very different things, from notion of the beauty as in the golden triangle and ratio and so forth. Yes, please.
I'm not quite sure if I fully understand the text and what you are trying to say here, but so is it? It seems that you're comparing science and art, or the practices, practice, and I think I don't know much about art, so just so that you know. But from my shallow understanding of art, and I think there is a very a big difference between these two is that for scientists, and I'm not like trying to say what you're doing, but from my observation, it seems that most scientists, or maybe many scientists that I know, they start with a very specific question. So when they are starting to do something, they already have like a target question, and that involves a very specific phenomenon that they want to explore. And then they maybe also they have already have a theory in mind that they want to support. And I think that with a certain set of equipment, some kind of paradigm, I can do something. These to support some kind of theory to explain this phenomenon that they have been interested for maybe a long time, and then that is how they do. Like they are somehow theory-driven phenomena. Like they already have a phenomenon in mind. They are driven by that to do their scientific practice. And but here you seem to suggest, I'm not sure if I'm understanding correctly. You seem to suggest that we should play around. Maybe should is something that's too strong. I don't think we're saying that we should do. But it's like, it would be good that we play around and not making the cut immediately and seeing what happens from the moment. Am I right?
Yes. So first, I wish to try not to compare science, and it's not in a reflective, not in a this compared to that, but to diffractively think through science through improvisation and improvisation through science. So it's a bit different. It's hard exercise to do because we're not used to that. So I'm making an effort. What I'm trying to say is that though often science is practiced in the way you mentioned, we have moments that's why I talked about the example from the frog eye to the frog brain experiment, where they were definitely doing something that looks much more like improvisation. in that way. The kind of question they had was very open-ended, rather than very specific, and they designed their experiment in a way that's very individual. Though I do agree with you that often experiments are not built like that. However, however, there is a problem. The problem, you know, it's interesting being in a case of education. Is art education, but I think it's an important point. Science education. So wait, step back. Uri Alon, who is a prominent scientist in the Weizmann Institute in Israel, talks about it. You can see his TED talk, etc. He talks about it being in the cloud, and he talks about being in the cloud. And he talks about the fact that scientists, you know, he's a physicist working in systems biology, that there is this moment during the research project in the lab where they feel they're in the cloud. They don't know, they're lost. And he says, this is good. This is part of the science. We get lost, we don't know it, and then all of a sudden we get out of the cloud and we have our experiment, we have the result, we publish. And he says, he has a whole elegy for the cloud. The problem being in the cloud, which is a little bit that kind of quality of suspending the time, if you want, I would say. Though, of course, though for him, the final result of a scientific practice should be a published paper with a result for a specific question. But he does recognize the place in the process for the cloud. The problem is that when you go to schools where they teach science, or textbooks that talk about science, nobody talks about the cloud. They describe science as being something that you come with a question from home, you come to the lab, the question is done, you ask it. And we know that that's not the way it works. If you go into the life of a lab for a scientist, you know that there's lots of clouds all the time. And then moments where you get out of the cloud. So maybe if we need to make a comparison, those cloud moments might be closer to what we experience as improvisers. And this cloud is a disorienting moment, right? Being in the cloud, you're disoriented. And then there are differences once you go into kind of... unfortunately, you know, I know about many... I don't know how it is here for funding in Taiwan in the arts, but I know many... It's very hard to get funding for improvisation in the arts, in France, for example, because there is no... They want to see photos of the... You know, how will it look? What will happen? What will be on stage? How long will it be? How many people? What... And those are the same question. You know, so this is not a problem that's only in the sciences today. And I don't also want to talk about the arts as a big thing. I'm talking about improvisation practice specifically. I don't know much about other art practice. So I would claim that we can learn from improvisation about maybe how to do science.
I would comment, there's some kind of aesthetics in the science, for example, art constrainer. It means less. Let's say if you have two series, one one series can use a few principles to explain something, and also you have another model, use a lot of things to explain things. You would prefer the simple one. Also applies to arts. Yeah, so, however, like you say, I give an example. When we have a great invention, we have a great imagination first, like crowd. But whenever we feel there's water in the air, actually we feel the raindrop. But before we feel the raindrop, we specifically feel the water coming from the air, we need to have a cloud first. So you cannot expect, okay, we just have the water coming from nowhere, you need to make this cloud. So this same thing applies to artists and scientists.
I think it has to do with this. That's why I agree that I don't think that art making is theory, lacks theory as well. So I think that I would say that artists also go with some knowledge. They have a theory they are working with. You know, maybe not in the same explicit way as scientists do, but so I think it's related to that. I think there is a theory, but there are models.
Yeah, I think I do agree with what you were saying with the implementation in science, because I think what is more interesting and what has been interests me is not just like the methodology in science, but also like how scientists change the way they conceptualize things. And it's, I think, I don't know exactly what you were trying to say with disorientation in first slides of the suspending section, but I think it's quite similar to that. Like you can see that scientists sometimes they would shift their concept to understand the results or understand the to explain some phenomena and or how they kind of see things. And I think there maybe is some kind of disorientation that's recorded in this process, which is messy and they don't want people to see.
So Reinberger, that I cited before, talks about a lot of cases, what we call serendipity, etc., where people went to look for something, found something totally different, got that published saying, that's what we looked for, look how nice, and then actually later when they finish their career and they can retire, they write a book and then they tell the real story of how they found it by mistake. But you can't say that, you can't write a Nature paper saying like, we totally did not think of it, we did something else and we found that, look how exciting.
Yeah, I want to share a story related to Feldenkrais, which I'm researching, who is a somatic practitioner who is a great contributor to the field of somatic. He was working in the lab in Paris with Dr. Curie, who discovered the radium. And the process actually is an accident. The assistant tried to make the error, like to reset all the apparatus and try to redo the experiment. But actually, Dr. Curie, he found that the sound was different. And because he was doing the experiment for a long time, he can very distinguish the difference. And he realized, wow, it's something he didn't heard before. And this is the starting point of a whole new discovery, and it's leading him to this radio. So for Feldenkrais, it's a very interesting experience because for him it's like, because Dr. Curie has this kind of sensitivity in discriminating what is differences in the experience. So that made him leading him to another direction instead of what they are already planning to do for quite a while.
So notice the fact, and we read the quote from Latvin saying that they not use their own listening as the device, but also notice that going back to this fMRI and so forth, the noise of this thing was literally noise, was not part of the experiment. He turned it into relevant data because he was open to the fact that something can shift from becoming, and if you're not able to be in a place where you're suspending what matters and what not matters, then you will never make this discovery, because this will be already excluded by definition, because we know that's not part of what's important. Another famous story that we cite in the article is the one you've probably heard about mirror neurons. I don't really care about mirror neurons that much, but the discovery was really interesting, because they were in Italy, in Parma, and they were measuring motor activity in monkeys. So they had electrons in the monkey, and they were looking at reaching actions of the monkey. So they were just sitting there, and like, the monkey was reaching, they were recording, and then they did a break, and they are Italians, so one of them went to have coffee. So and I heard him speak in a conference, he was describing, so he reached to the coffee, and all of a sudden they hear the noise of the neuron of the monkey. The monkey is sitting there not doing anything, and the experimenter is reaching for the coffee. And it's that made them discover that there are neurons that are responding both to the action of the animal and to seeing someone doing the same action. So again, imagine if they said, now it's break, we're not listening, or this is noise, we don't care because we're on coffee break now, this is not science. We would not have discovered mirror neurons. Maybe that's a good thing, because mirror neurons is a mess, but at least it's important to know that this was discovered by this kind of mistake, much less fundamental than the case of Curie. Okay, can we continue? Yeah, so let's suspend the cut. So one of the questions I'm asking, and I'm sharing this is really ongoing research, we want to use the sticks again to suspend the cut, try to do that, and we'll do it in a way that I find particularly what joint improvisation teaches us. So now we'll have two people holding a stick. So find a partner and have one stick between you. And you're going together to do, so I should say, the stick is you're going to use the stick again in the same action of, you have three options, right? Feeling the environment, feeling the stick, or feeling yourself. But now you have a second person touching the stick too. Yeah, so you're not doing something together for It's just that two people are holding the stick. Each of you want to do one of those three options. Yeah. Feel the environment, feel the stick, or feel yourself. Eyes closed. If you have three, it works as well. Two. So, while we continue to do that, I'm just suggesting, this practice is, at least for me, brings about a certain state in which I'm not sure what the cut is. There's a certain uncertainty. I'm not able to fully disambiguate, to resolve the inherent ambiguity of the situation. I don't know if I'm being measured, if I'm measuring, if the stick is being measured, is the stick measuring, it's the environment, it's the other. Let's maybe just stop here. I mean, this can go on, could be very pleasurable, we can go for a long time, or we'd be like, what the hell are we doing with this stick here? This is totally... it's a risk here because I'm not sure that it's as easy as that to bring about this quality by just suggesting to two people to touch a stick together. So I'm hoping we were able to touch that. So again, I rephrase what I said. I'm suggesting that joint improvisation, so when we are improvising with at least one or more other people or things, sounds like original, that is kind of a recipe or kind of a framework that invites a certain suspension of, can be, it's not always the case, but can be a framework that allows for this suspension of the Agential Cut. I hope that was, I don't know if anyone is totally disagreeing or very confused. I'd be happy to hear, or has other things to say about this experience. I'd be curious. Yeah.
I was suggest S after the comma.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
That's important.
No, good point. Yeah. There are multiple cuts.
Yeah. The reason is if you have one cut, then you have structure, very structure. It's no longer cuts.
No. The agential cutting. So the cutting is any. So we are trying to. Yes. We actually will do this too.
Yes.
This was not the score we did now. That's why I was saying that it's delicate. I suggest specifically not to start dancing with the other with the stick, but to go back to your original score where you are either feeling the stick, feeling the environment, or feeling yourself, with the added factor that another person is touching the stick. This is a slightly different score. We will do that score for a different point later on, if we have time. This is different. That's why I said it's delicate. Because once you go into using the stick as a medium of a common dance, I think we're in a different world than the one I was trying to point to. Thank you. Very important. That's why I said I'm taking a risk, because that's the habit usually, to go into that, into dancing together with the stick, and that wasn't the proposal. Is that clear? I mean, it's a bit delicate. Sorry. I just want to finish with something that will be a bit... so responsibility comes from Donna Haraway. I like a lot this idea of the play kind of reintroducing the Latin into responsibility, into the ability to respond as an ethical construct. Indeed, as Butler and Bohr emphasized, Judith Butler, that which is excluded in the, this is Barad speaking of course, excluded in the enactment of knowledge discourse power practices plays a constitutive role in the production of phenomena. Exclusions matter both to bodies that come to matter and those excluded for mattering. So again, the examples we saw before was when we exclude the noise of fMRI, we don't get function. When we include it, we get it. By excluding it, we get structural MRI. But of course, we can look, those issues have to do with also literal bodies, and we can talk about post-colonialism and other things with respect to the same, using the same framework. Accountability and responsibility must be thought of in terms of what matters and what is excluded from mattering. I think it's really, really important, because I think that as scientists, but I also believe this is true in the arts, we forget sometimes that we forget what is excluded. And we forget that a lot of, in our actions, we are always excluding things. There's no way to include everything. This is the point from about art, right? We can't include everything because then there's just a phenomenon. There's always an agential cut for knowledge to become knowledge, but by suspending, and then the argument from improvisation is by suspending the cut, we are bringing awareness to what is being potentially excluded, to all the potential exclusions, all the potential inclusions. And by that, I suggest that there is an ethical kind of stance in improvisation, potentially. Going back, so actually in Net Science, the first version of the John Cage, 4 minutes, 33 seconds, is great for that, because basically it says like, what you call silence is not silence. There's a lot going on, but usually we exclude that, because we're listening to the music. This is not. If we just spend 4 minutes and 33 seconds listening to nothing, a lot comes in. I just really like this citation. It brought about the last, I will just tell you in a moment about it. What we need is something like an ethical epistemology, an appreciation of the intertwining of ethics, knowing, and being. Yeah, so ethical epistemology, ethic, knowing, and being. Yeah? Those three things come together. That's what I just said. Since each interaction matters, since the possibilities for what the world may become, they become call out, and that I like a lot, in the pause that precedes each breath, before a moment comes into being and the world is remade again. Because the becoming of the world is deeply ethical matter. And I like the pause that precedes each breath. Dancers, again in Japan, talking about ma, often talk about the breath as being that's the word they use to describe the moment of ma, this moment of pause. Yeah, and then back to Massumi and the text, and I like this is a beautiful text about the politics. So the aesthetics he defined before are also political. So aesthetic politics is essential in the sense that it holds contrasting alternatives together without immediately demanding that one alternative eventuate and the others evaporate. It makes thought felt different capacities for existence, different life potentials, different forms of life, without immediately imposing a choice between them. And this last phrase for me is a powerful suggestion. The political question then is not how to find a resolution. It's not how to impose a solution. It's how to keep the intensity in what comes next. And again, the political as an aesthetic politics. Yeah? And I think as improviser, at least I feel that. Yeah? And the suggestion from Brian Massumi that this is a political stance as well. So we will not do this composing. I should have found that, but Alexandra, my collaborator, found that. It's so nice. Composing, posing together, and making a pause together, composing. Very good. I wanted to suggest another practice, but we won't have time and it will be too long. But I just wanted to think of pausing, making pauses. If you know Lisa Nelson's work, who knows Lisa Nelson's work here? Anyone? No. So I won't spend time talking about it. But she has a practice of calling out calls, and one of them calls is a pause, which is an invitation for everyone in space to pause. So maybe let's have a pause, a break, the other meaning of pause. So actually I love this, I'm projecting this video here. It wasn't at all planned, but this whole again, creates a whole different reading of the video. It feels like 6 balls kind of being really afraid of this hole. Avoiding it. This was of course not, if you move the screen, the hole will not be part of it. You'll see how much meaning this is again noise becoming signal. It's nice. So I want to talk about this project that we are currently, it's the second year, we are doing called Articulation, which is a nice collaboration between artists, designers of virtual reality, dancers, anthropologists, cognitive scientists, philosophers. It's a whole big bunch of people working together, asking their own questions. So we are not all asking one question, but we are using a framework to ask multiple questions at multiple levels. So anthropologists asking questions about how scientists meet artists, for example, and what weird things they do, and designers care about ways to make virtual reality more or less, more usually interesting or usable for users. And we as scientists are interested let's say in this case as a scientist, we're interested in Also, we are thinking of it as a tool for education and then maybe intervention, but also studying human behavior in a particular way. So now you're seeing two people dancing together. That's what they see. So this is literally the two. You see 3 and 3, and now you see that they see themselves in a mirror as well. They basically have trackers on both hands and the head. But their universe is a universe of spheres moving around. The bodies disappeared. So we can go to the next. So
a question: why there's only 4 dark points on the wall? Sorry, on the wall and 6.
No, there were 6 in the mirror. Maybe it's about 6 of them. It's a real mirror. It's an honest mirror. So we could play with it. We actually play with the mirror. I'll tell you about it in a moment. So I also want to mention that this is part of Altec. Altec is an interesting new graduate school in France. You might be interested in for yourself, for your students, for your friends, family, or just if you're interested. There were ways to come to visit Altec, and also if the university is interested, you can come you can become a partner of Altec. So students from there can come here to spend a semester. It's both a master program, a PhD, sort of a PhD program, and a project-based funding thing. And it involves a lot of institutes. As you can see, I made a big list, very impressive list in the bottom. Our research is kind of in this and that, I guess in between these two, creation as research activity and technologies and human mediation. So what are we interested in this? So as I said, we have different questions we can ask. These are just mentioned here. Particularly we are interested, I did not mention the fact that we are still just in the beginnings of that, but how we can use virtual reality, we talked about it yesterday, how we can use virtual reality medium itself to access more rich first-person experience of one's own narrative of their experience. So we are very good at measuring stuff like movement or heart rate or other kind of measures, but we really want to also get rich data from what the person feels or felt through an experience, and that's very hard. And so we are kind of betting on the fact that using virtual reality we can get richer data. I will mention that briefly. So specifically I want to talk today about how we are using this specific installation to study relational movement. So relational movement is a term that comes from Erin Manning. If you don't know Erin Manning yet, all of you should read her. Simply, she's really one of a major philosopher, artist, visual artist, dancer, that is at the heart of the research creation kind of thinking in Montreal. The partner of Brian Massumi that we read before. And in Relationscapes, which is one of her main books, she says that the most straightforward way to conceive relational movement, besides she comes from tango. The most straightforward way to conceive relational movement is side by side or face to face. Think walking with a lover or dancing tango. Walking with is more than taking a step. It is creating a movement. Relational movement means moving the relation. We walk. I'm leading, but that does not mean I'm deciding. Leading is more like initiating and opening, entering the gap, then following a response. How I follow, with what intensity we create a space, we influence how our bodies move together. I'm not moving her, nor is she simply responding to me. We are beginning to move relationally, creating an interval that we move together. The more we connect to this becoming movement, the more palpable the interval becomes. We begin to feel the relation. She said that's just some citation of her writing. There's a lot more. I invite you to read. So this is you can feel a philosophical, aesthetic, artistic experience in dance, in moving, but relational movement is everywhere. I think it's the next slide. I'm hoping I remember my slides. Yes. So this is an experiment done by, so in the late 60s, early 70s, psychologists got video for the first time, high-resolution video that allowed to film in like 48 or so images a second. So they could look at the very small details of the interaction between Colin Treverton actually started working with monkeys first, and then he was invited to Harvard by Brunner to study mothers and babies interacting. And so they used video for the first time and started to look at what is happening between the mother and the baby. And this is an experiment they did, which I think gives a good idea of what is relational movement. Or we can watch the video.
Ill-face experiment what the mother did was she sits down and she's playing with her baby.
It's horrible, sorry, but it's really not nice.
And
don't do it.
She gives a greeting to the baby gives a greeting back to her. This baby starts pointing at different places in the world and the mother's trying to engage her and play with her. They're working to coordinate their emotions and their intentions, what they want to do in the world. And that's really what the baby is used to. And then we ask the mother to not respond to the baby. The baby very quickly picks up on this. And then she uses all of her abilities to try and get the mother back. She smiles at the mother. She points because she's used to the mother looking where she points. The baby puts both hands up in front of her and says, "What's happening?" She makes that screechy sound at the mother, like, "Come on, why aren't we doing this?" Even in this 2 minutes, when they don't get the normal reaction, they react with negative emotions, they turn away, they feel the stress of it, they lose control of their posture because of the stress that they're experiencing.
Horrible. I can't believe they even allow them to replicate it for video. It's so terrible. But it's just really, that's what happens when relational movement breaks down. Unfortunately, that happens with autism. And what breaks down in autism is not the child's behavior, it's a relationship. So it's a relational movement is critical to our way of being in the world from when we are babies and into adulthood. It's interesting to talk about Stern for people here that are practicing or interested in content improvisation. Steve Paxton met Daniel Stern in the 70s, even before, when he was just starting to think of content improvisation, and realized how much relationship was within this practice he was starting to develop and the mother-baby interaction. And so there was like he was inspired by that kind of interaction between the mother and the baby is what we do when we do content improvisation. That's just a side point. So let's just do a quick relational movement. So take two people with a stick. You pick the stick. You don't hold it with your hand. You just put it finger to finger. So like this. Yeah. You close your eyes and you let the stick move you. So this was like a quick and dirty way to bring us into this place of moving together without feeling that one person is guiding and one is following. That's kind of eliminating the possibility we need to initiate and just being in following. So this kind of mutual movement or relational movement is something we are familiar with, and we've seen it with babies and mothers, we know it from dancing. We wanted to be able to study that ecologically, rigorously, being able to modify the parameters of the interaction, being able to control or eliminate irrelevant factors, and it will be accessible to non-dancers. So now we are very much back to this studying improvisation rather than improvisation being, so we are kind of more standard science. However, it is standard science that tries at least to not have people lie down or sit in front of a computer and press a button. Yeah? So maybe a little bit more engaged. The problem is that the moment you have people go around in the world and do things, especially with other people, it becomes untractable. Too many things are happening. And so the question is, how do we reduce that? Here was an example, it's a good example. We can reduce it to two fingers moving and only pressure being the information we have. This is actually called, if you're interested in this kind of experiments, so this is called the perceptual crossing paradigm. For people who are interested in cognitive science, it's basically, they're not doing it with a stick. There's something like that going on. We try to use virtual reality. So that's our setup. We have two people, they're in the same big room, but in separate physical spaces. They are connected through headsets, through two computers, and a server connecting them, and so they actually think they're in the same space. They see each other in the same space. They can cross each other's bodies. So this is just examples. So that's us working with. So this is from last April. One of our first attempts to go with members of public. So they come in, they put the headset on. You can imagine how that looks. And then they start moving. Let's just go to the next video. Yeah. So this, just to make a point, these are Julien, who is a cognitive scientist, Mathieu, who is a dancer, and so those are part of the group, and we are like, just to show you an example of some video that I captured kind of quickly on my phone, all of the design happened iteratively through our own experience. So we were experiencing the setup, asking questions about our own experience, and making that into experiments. So we're not just coming and saying like, we had a big question, but it was a lot of what we did later in proper experiments, you'll be seeing soon, come from our own exploration of this universe. And we came up with a new name. Instead of virtual reality, we call it diminished reality. It's also helpful for participants because people think, oh, virtual reality is going to be amazing, it's going to be like monsters coming from everywhere. And all of a sudden they put on the headset and there's like empty space and 3 balls floating. And they're like that. So we prepare them ahead of time, telling them it's going to be diminished reality. So it's a reality where there's less of everything. And the advantage is, of course, is that it allows us to eliminate a lot of things. So gender, race, appearance, environmental noise, mainly eliminating the body, and minimizing the information to only 3 points. So all I know from the other person is like here now with the stick. I only know those 3 things. Everything else is gone. So this is a video. So we went to the Tate Modern in London to run an experiment with public. We're invited, so there's a video we won't see. But you can imagine how that looks. You've seen the video a little bit. 2 people are moving. They see each other as spheres in a space. And we basically will show you, just basically so you understand the logic, we did basically 2 experiments. One in which they had a mirror in front of them, or not. Yeah, so the mirror allows them to see both of them together in the mirror, like we could all look in the mirror and see ourselves. Just that we manipulated the mirror in 2 ways. In one condition, their colors of the spheres were the same, all of them, so they're all white, let's say. And the other one, some were white and one were blue. And we were wondering how will that change the way they interact together. The fact that they are able to discriminate between their spheres by color or not. That was the first experiment. The second experiment is body transformation, in which we eliminated my perception of my own hands. So when I look in virtual reality, in one condition I can see the spheres here, and so when I move I have a visual feedback of my movement. In the other condition, they don't see their hands, they only see the other. And so this is like really standard science, but done in a more open-ended, playful way. People are enjoying it, they're fun, they want to stay longer. And they are really, for themselves, they're kind of improvising. Sometimes they don't even realize that the other balls are the other person, but they're still having a lot of fun. So this I explained. Oh, and so one thing we did already, which is kind of nice, if people are interested in virtual reality and using it, is after they finish moving around with the partner disappears, and then for 1 minute, before they take the headset off, they talk about their experience. We found that very interesting because virtual reality, if you have the experience, it's slightly a state of modified consciousness, I think. And so when we ask people to speak when they're still with the headset on, we get a different quality of narrative than afterwards when they take it off and then talk about that experience. So I think that's kind of our insight into starting to use virtual reality to probe first-person experience in a different ways. Like people putting people under hypnosis of some sort. And then we have questionnaires and then an interview. Yeah, I won't go. We have movement data, and I'll just show you some just simple results. I want to show the next slide. So this, again, because we don't have much time, we won't be able to go too much into details of what we found. So this is stuff we just last night submitted the paper to Frontiers with these results. So this is all very new. So I told you about these different, so let's just talk about this result. So what we found was actually very interesting, and not what we expected to find, a little bit. So that's one of those cases. So what we found is where they had this, so this is the baseline, no mirror at all. This is the case where they have a mirror and it's the same color. And this is a case where they have different colors in the mirror. Yeah? Same here, baseline, same color, different color. And what we find, you see in both cases that it's the same color where behavior is different than in the baseline or in the different colors. And what we find is that they overall move more when they have a mirror and they're all in the same color. And if you look at the next slide, we also find that the relative movement, the relative speed of movement, so my movement compared to your movement is more different in this condition. So when people have the same, and that's actually, I would admit, this surprised us because our naive intuition was that by having the same color, people will feel more oneness, will feel, oh, we're all the same, and we'll kind of move together more. We find that, but they're a bit more complicated, but at least some measures suggest the other way around. So when we are the same color, we move more differently, and the reason now we think, and we are now studying it, is that you need to differentiate yourself from the other. You need to know which balls are which of the spheres are you, and which is the other, so you have to move more differently. When you know that you are the red and they are the blue, even without moving, you know where you are. So there's interesting need, if you want to kind of philosophize it or generalize it, the need we have in the world to differentiate ourselves from the other. If we are too mixed with the other, then we also can't, this is also not good. So we always need to, we have mechanisms that make us separate our own data, our own sensory data from the other. And we see that when we ask them questions, also we find our correlations, and I'm feeling this, it will be too hard to get it in explaining, but basically we ask them how separate do you feel from the other person, and what we find is that the more the person feels the more they move faster. So we don't know the direction. Is it because they move faster that they feel more separated, or is it because they felt more separated that they move faster? But we know there's a relationship between moving more and feeling more separated or less separated from the other. So there's this qualitative relationship. If you take the next slide. And also we ask this feeling of oneness. This is itaikan in Japanese, by the way, so feeling of one. And we find also, we ask people how much you felt when the colors were the same, how much you felt connected to felt in one with the other. And again, we find strong correlation, significant correlation between the more I moved, the less I felt one with the other. And the more difference was between our speed of movements, the less I felt one with the other. So it's not totally surprising, but it's nice to be able to relate subjective experience with some measures of movement. It's not straightforward to do that. I won't go into all the, I didn't have enough time today to tell you a bit about the science that already happened, but those are hard things to put together. People have not been able to quantitatively put experience and movement data with respect to this feeling of oneness until now. This is kind of the first step towards that. This is just to show you some other visualizations, so quickly can you start with it? So this is just, this is we developed, we have not yet tested it like more experimentally, but you can see very easily that you can change those spheres and you can make them into a lot of other things. And we are looking into that for some other questions we have, also using audio feedback. And if you make the next video, this is another thing we can do. Again, we've only been playing with it, we've not tested it yet. So this is just, we are adding between participants like this kind of object, this kind of magic carpet. So when they move now, they feel connected. So we'll be interested to see how that changes their experience, but we've not yet tested that. And yeah, so this is some stuff we'll be done. And this is just a publicity because Karen Barad, which I mentioned so many times today, we invited her, so in June she will be coming for a week to France, and we're doing summer school with her, which registrations are now open. So it's called Entangled Knowledges, and you are very welcome to come if you can, or will be in Europe, and you want to spend a week with us in the countryside, moving, gardening, and doing philosophy. about research, practice, researchers practice, practice research. So come to me after I can tell you more. Thank you very much for your time.